Is
It's something missing. Yeah, it would make it easier. So,
yeah, he was a bad boy. Out. He's still a little that man. Oh, Sean. He was thoroughly good.
What? Do you have any? I understand. We have 5, I think, on Zoom too. So
Well, everybody is only signed from the board of directors to go out individually. Because I did college.
welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have a good program, I think. I'm pretty excited about it. My name is Claire Eagle. I'm the Executive Director for the Tippecanoe County Historical Association. And we have with us tonight, Alden Finholm, the Community Preservation Specialist with the Western Regional Office of Indiana Landmarks. I got that all out. I was a little concerned I wasn't going to get it. I don't think I can. So I'm going to pass it along to her. She'll have her presentation. We'll have some time for questions at the end. For those of you on Zoom, please do keep yourself muted. And if you have any questions or comments, you can share them in the chat. So with that, I'll pass it on to Alden.
Thank you, Claire. Appreciate it. And thank you guys for inviting me out this evening. I'm really excited to talk about the stories buildings tell. Quick before we start, how many of you guys attended the Ratio Architects presentation on investigating historic properties and researching? How many? You two? Just those two, correct? And Claire as well. That's all right, because a lot of that times stories buildings tell and investigating historic properties and researching really do overlap. So I can kind of go into it a little bit more as well, and I'll kind of hit on those areas as well. But for you two, it'll be a little bit more of a reminder, and you guys can kind of build off of that knowledge that you guys have learned from your past presentation. All right. Sorry about that. It's been giving us a little bit of a, all right. And this is coming on. I'll just go into a little bit more while we're waiting for this to load really quickly. Oh, perfect. All right. So before I begin, a little bit more about myself. My name is Alden, as you have heard. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado, and I attended school at the College of Charleston in South Carolina, where I received my Bachelor of the Arts at the College of Charleston for Historic Preservation and Community Planning and Urban Studies and Marketing. And so this is one of my favorite buildings at the College of Charleston. I want to kind of tie it in because this is one of the reasons I love historic preservation, is more going back to the oral history and how it ties in with architecture and researching properties, and overall just preservation in general. So here we have is the Towle Library. It is the, I would say, second library. The first one was a small room in the main building, but this was the primary library of the campus. It was built in 1856, just before the Civil War, and it is technically, with its frame, a Greek revival with a Italianate architecture. As you can kind of see, the cornerstones on each side resemble Italianate, the arched windows, which you can kind of see that relates back to the courthouse here in Lafayette, and then the long engaged front doors. And so what I wanted to bring up this story to you all is, while we're telling stories buildings tell, it really does tie into a lot of factual evidence that kind of perpetuate this narrative and this story. But I also kind of want to talk about the lore that comes in with these buildings that we hear so much about, because what I find is that when you are hearing these stories and that they're passed on through the years, they tend to get a little bit misconstrued or little details. You can kind of hear that in a lot of family history as well. But in the end, they do hold a lot of history and truth to them as well. So again, this is Towle Library in the main square of College of Charleston. And when kids come to tour the school, they hear about how the reason that they chose the Italianate style architecture and that elongated door is primarily because they didn't want girls coming in with their hoop skirts and bothering the boys inside the library. And, that kind of gets a little bit of a giggle. And, but it really does tie back into and gives more information on the time of when the building was built. It was time when females weren't allowed on campus. It was a strictly all male college. But I do want to preference that even though that is a funny story, architecture style does not follow trends of fashion. It does kind of sometimes coexist, but they do not rely on fashion itself. You will never hear that. So if you kind of hear those stories of specifically making architecture conform to textile fashion, that is not the case, but still nonetheless a very, very funny story that I always giggle to hear. And it does kind of tie back to the history. And that's really what we kind of hear in oral history as well. Another one that I don't have brought up, but I also like to talk about is even just kind of more spiritual ghost stories and such like that. They usually tie back into researching properties and finding out about past deaths and people that have lived there. And that usually ends up creating those lores and those ghost stories that attach to the home. So not saying they're all true in what people have seen, but they usually have factuals tied to them. And that's a part of what stories buildings tell as well. So quickly, terms to know for those who didn't attend the presentation. So these are kind of terms that I usually kind of throw out there. It's good to know these just so you can kind of keep up. And I'm always happy to go back to these and give you guys definitions as well. So no worries. So significance is just the history and architecture, environment's integrity. So how is it still holding on to what it was initially meant for? Character defining features, overall shape of the building, materials, craftsmanship, decorative details, interior spaces, and its features. One of those could be like the Queen Anne's long turret. Those are in those very romantic features. Those are very much in the colorful paints and that are usually applied to the homes. Those are character defining details. Integrity is usually tied for its significance to its location, setting, design, materials, and workmanship. So again, if it has been preserved and is still holding its integrity, it will still hold on to its original intent. So maybe a building is still a Macy's after 100 years. Maybe it's still a grocery store or a automobile garage. Those are still its integrity, holding locations, settings, and overall associations to its community. And then vernacular architecture is just the constructions and materials that apply to the regional area. So another question I want you guys to kind of think about is, how does our architecture in America vary from architecture around the world? Start thinking about residential homes in Japan and other regions of Asia, how it varies from homes up in the Nordic areas, and even down in Peru and Argentina and all those areas. They vary because their environments vary, their climates vary, and the materials that they can have access to, especially before we became more industrialized, they had to maneuver around. And even not even just around the world, it can be either around the state. I know that you guys obviously get a lot more snow than Charleston, so you guys have to kind of prep for that as well. Charleston is able to have those flatter roofs on their homes because they don't collect as much snow fall. So here you're going to see a lot more strictly slanted roofs. While in Charleston, you're also going to see now we have to start rising our homes up a little higher to kind of mitigate flooding as well. And even how homes are positioned enough to create, specifically historic homes before AC was implanted in these homes. How are these homes turned to create proper airflow throughout the homes? A lot of homes in Charleston are facing the waterways so they can kind of catch those hard air flows through the areas and creating a natural AC unit. For here, it would be a lot of sunrooms. I see a lot because on those sunny days, you have to be sitting outside, and even in some climates, it's still pretty cold out and you still have to go sit outside. So you see a lot more sunrooms in this region. So moving on. I like to refer to buildings are like onions, and this is kind of comes from our education director. She mentions Shrek in this because have you guys ever seen Shrek at all? He refers to himself as an onion. Donkey refers to him as onion. There's always different layers to these buildings that you're trying to pull back and find out. And over time, the layers grow. So so maybe some buildings have some new additions to them that might not have been there, but now that they're historically attached to those buildings and they are significant and a character defining feature, even though they're not original to the building, just because over time they have grown around these certain additions and changes. And again, as I go into this, I also want you guys to think about during these style times, I want you guys to think about the who, what, when, where, and why of these buildings are being made. What are the economic issues going on? What are the political climates of that time? And what are the social stigmas? It can be changes and overall events going on right now, because that will also change how we see architecture kind of getting pushed in through there. One we can say from right now is from maybe 30 years ago is that we're seeing a lot more open concept spaces. I can kind of see that now changing back because no one really wants to be cleaning up their kitchen 24/7 for their guests. So we're seeing those close off a little bit more again. But we did see that resurgence of just having those open concept spaces because we were reinviting friends and family in, and we wanted to be close around them. And usually everything was happening in the kitchen. So that's something to think about and how different architecture styles changed throughout that time. All right, so some resources that you can use when researching your historic properties. And I also wanted to add that there is a very helpful Facebook page called Preservation Historic Lafayette. And that has a lot of great resources, a lot of people posting historic photos of the area and just an overall great community that you can ask questions to as well. So I didn't want to leave that out. There is a Sean Lutz. He is also with the Wabash Valley Trust, and he is also on there a lot. And he's posting about different things that he finds and researches as well. So he's a great resource to be asking these questions to as well. So I didn't want to skip over him because he's a great resource to the community. But looking at your public library and of course the Tippecanoe Historical Association is a great resource to help find those photos and kind of build that community. Obviously ancestry.com. Library of Congress is a great for Sanborn maps. It's a little slow of a website, so you have to be patient, but it's a great resource nonetheless. Hoosier State Chronicles, if you know which newspaper that you are looking for and time frame, you just have to be willing to weed through a couple newspapers because there's a lot of information on there. And then Newspapers Archive, it does give you a 7-day free trial, but it does become a paid subscription after. And then Find a Grave, just because it has that kind of collection, you can start dating and timelining who's been in your homes and buildings and such like that. So just wanted to kind of point to some resources as some of you guys hadn't attended that researching historic properties. All right, so another part of the stories buildings tell is reading the physical fabric of buildings. Here we have the kerf marks on historic wood on beams and such. And this is a really great indicator in dating buildings because at certain times, obviously, you can see this hand sewn beam was with an axe. So it's obviously you can see those really hard kerf marks just getting raked into the beam itself. As we become more industrialized, you start seeing more straight parallel marks and circular saws, just because obviously machines can become more redundant and in a swifter motion. And that's a great way to kind of decide, hey, is this addition new or is it original? And when did it come into place into a building itself? Another that not many people know, but I think it's a really interesting fact, is that there's only been really 3 variations in nail types throughout history, which is really fascinating to me. You have the top, which is slightly a top wrought nail. Oh, sorry. And then the middle cut nail is from the 1790s and the 1820s period. That's what we'll mostly kind of see here, if in really kind of early homes. And then you'll see the lower modern wire nail. So it's really kind of coming down to that body and that head itself. But I find it really fascinating that that's such a core element to buildings, and we really just haven't changed it too much, other than using screws and ducktails to hook buildings together. All right, so another one is local materials. We also see in different regions sourcing materials from their region, because obviously they're easily accessible and it's more affordable. So here we have is the river rock on this small cottage right here that you can see out. It's obviously derived from the local riverbeds. And then here we have, I wouldn't refer to this as natural material because this is the raw stone. This was actually engineered by a Purdue graduate. It's more of a limestone base that's poured into mold, but you can see it on a lot of bungalows itself, and a great resource nonetheless. But very interesting that it was created here in Lafayette by a Purdue student. Another one that you see throughout Indiana is the Bedford stone. And I also wanted to place this photo up here as well, because just a really great hodgepodge of different styles. I also find it very interesting that a lot of funeral homes always kind of gravitate towards Victorian homes. I think it's because it gravitates to that style of the afterlife and spiritualism attached to Victorian homes at that time. So I find it really interesting, and you can kind of see it in this building as well. If you kind of look at the molding up top of its original features, obviously it has a metal roof right now, so it's a very hodgepodge of all the different eras. And then the Bedford stone of its kind of 1950s, let's go with 1950s era edition right there as well. But again, using local resources to apply to their materials in their homes. Even more so, you can kind of see how different tradesmen have used to style out different variations of their homes. So obviously, these are not the same style of home. On the right, we have a Queen Anne with its long turret. And then on the other side, we have an arts and crafts. But if you look really closely, anyone tell me what they have the same identifying qualities?
Triangles. There's a little triangle in the porches.
Right, the porches. Yeah, you're right. Exactly. So so those obviously are not the original porch. A company had come out, or a craftsperson has come out and redone it. I'm suggesting probably like 1930s, 1940s, they had come out and redid the porch. but it just kind of shows that obviously the kind of change and push throughout the years. And so, yeah, two different homes have the same stylistic. And if you were to look into that a little bit further, maybe if you were trying to research your own property, you would look back and say, oh, hey, my neighbor has my same porch. I don't have information on who did my porch. Let me go ask them. It's just very, in preservation and in storytelling, it's very common knowledge. You'll kind of look at me and be like, okay, Sherlock, we understand. It's like very obvious. But nonetheless, some interesting points that, yeah, this same craftsperson also did multiple homes throughout the area. All right, so moving on to one of my favorite subjects is talking about the Sears kit homes throughout the area. How many people are familiar with the Sears kit home? Awesome. Does anyone have a Sears kit home that they know about? No?
Prophetstown.
What, pardon?
The farm at Prophetstown is a kid home.
Is? Okay, both of them? Okay, I'm not familiar with those type of the buildings or which types of them are, but I'll have to go look those up right after this. So here we have is the Crescent home, and this is a great home itself. So actually, before I get into this, the Sears Crescent homes, the Sears kit homes, they essentially started in 1906 and was by a man named Frank Cushnell, and he was working for the Sears catalog, and he was placed into a region of the company that was mainly for overproducted products, and so they had a bunch of inventory that needed to be sold, and he was dealt with the task to try to sell it. Obviously, he thought, well, why not just try to sell pre-made homes to people through a catalog, because one in five Americans were subscribed to this catalog at that time. So between the time of 1906 and 1916, those homes aren't really necessarily considered kit homes, just because he was still trying to pin down the manufacturing specialty at that time. He had to kind of evaluate the process. But after 1916, we can kind of see more of an industrialized version of these homes coming through. He had a factory in Illinois and another factory in New Jersey. And all of these homes were shipped out by train. And it's what's really fascinating that I was reading about is that all these homes are usually within a 5 to 10 mile radius of a train, because they had to be loaded off by a train to even be picked up. So you had to either, homeowners could either make it themselves, or they could hire out someone to build it for themselves. So if you thought that you were pretty handy enough to build these homes yourself, you could go to the train station and get these 30,000 pieces of home equipment and just take it back. And they said they're marketed as 180 days or less that you could build your home, depending on. And a lot of these homes ranged from really small English cottages to these mansions that were 5 bedrooms and 3 baths. And you could start adding on features. They didn't come with electricity and in-home plumbing, but you could add on those features closer to the 1940s when those modern upgrades were available. And so once you start like kind of looking through these catalogs, here, I'll go to the next. Here's the Crescent room, and you can kind of see how quaint it is, and how amazing those prices are at that time as well. But it's the 5-room neat porch, so it doesn't look too large from the outside, but had enough spacious room for a small family at that time. So they would market it out, you would order a catalog and it would be shipped out, and you could add certain features on there. And this kind of ranged from a lot of different styles. As you can see, also here's the Sunbeam house. And these are within the same neighborhood over in West Lafayette, by the way. And then, so here's the Sunbeam house. And I kind of want you guys to also think about what is going on in between 1916 and 1940s, usually when they were kind of, can anyone tell me what was like the economic and social scene of that time? Just kind of give me a guess. Exactly, war and oppression, right? So not a lot of people were able to go into work, or when they were coming back from the war, there was an influx of people needing jobs and money at that time. So these homes were a great resource at that time to be in those that production field, and also to create homes for those that were coming back. And also, looking back at the style of the time, you can kind of see that they have this very romantic cottage-like feel. It's because during that time after the war, people were very, they were going through a lot of obviously negative mindsets at that time. So they really were turning towards the comfort of the simplistic lifestyle. And that's why you kind of see that these romanticized small cottage homes that kind of relate back to England at that time were so popular. Here is one of my favorites, and actually a very popular style. It's called the Alhambra, and a larger, more mission style home. Obviously, they added some siding to it, but it was usually within stucco. So this was one of the larger homes as well. But you can also see in these catalogs that they have the floor plans out as well. And after the presentation, if you guys would like to come see it, I have one as well. Yes.
I don't know, it's okay to ask questions.
No.
So what's when we say small and larger, what's the square footage for some of these?
They usually can range, like, let's see. In the sake of time, I will quickly scan this and I will get back to you on that. But
All of them would be that very same kit.
yes, so they're all going to be standard, but they're all referred to as kit homes just because they are all a standard design and variation that you would just order on up until 1916 up until 1940. They all refer to as kit. Doesn't matter what size they were or square footage. They were all made to order. I guess, sorry, they were all ready to go in those different variations. So that's why they were referred to as kits.
Like it appears that there are several window sizes that repeat as far as dimension. I'm just thinking, that looks like you've got about 3 choices of window sizes and you can put them in.
Right. They all had like specifications, like they would give you like very detailed directions on like where it would go, even down to the timber. And that's actually how you can figure out if you have a Sears home, because they're not very, you can't find definite reports on if you have a Sears home, because after the catalog has kind of, and that whole company kind of fell through, they they just demolished all their records. So you really don't know if they are Sears home unless you look at the home, and that's kind of just like all point in case. So, but there are a couple ways to know if you have one. If you look at the timber, they usually do have some branding on them. If you look at the ceramic sinks, and if they had the ceramic tub, you can also see a CS, I believe, on some of them. There's also some stickers, but you could also use different timber from different areas to add onto them. So that's not always correct. But unfortunately, since the company had collapsed and they kind of took away they just demolished all their information. There's no hard evidence on those unless you obviously can tell very obviously through the catalogs that those are still standing. Yep. Yeah. I'm not gonna go into that, but yeah, they were just like, we're done doing the collection, and they were like, they just went through and they just demolished everything. But we have all their catalogs. I think they just didn't feel like it was necessary to document that. But so unless you go in and you can see the ideal, the scape of the buildings.
Duplicating their.
That could be it. That could be it as well.
process.
Exactly. We just don't know. But yeah, the manufacturing, it was just coming on so quickly that they probably just decided to dismantle it. But they're usually pretty easy to spot. And once you guys start looking at them, you will find them everywhere. It's very fascinating. I think I found at least 4 crescent homes while driving around in one afternoon here. So pretty popular because Lafayette was a train destination. It was very common and very accessible for people of that time to get their materials off that train, which is very fortunate. There is one though, the Magnolia, I believe that is the hardest one to find just because that one was the most expensive at the time. It was 5 bedrooms and 3 baths. So you don't see those a lot. I'm trying to recall where the last one was. I think it was up somewhere up north. But the Midwest is like the hub of Sears catalog homes. All right, so a little bit more local again. Does anyone know where this is? It's kind of an easy one. The Fowler House, right. How did you guys guess? All right, so and the Fowler House has remained very intact. So I want you guys to kind of focus in on this head of the fountain right there. And because that's kind of going to show what we kind of can see some changing as well in the next slide. So yeah, you can still see the remnants of that head fountain, but you can also see the stairways and the overall decor of the finials and eaves on those sides. You can also notice that you kind of veer, oops, if you can't see it in this photo, but this is a photo from the Historical Association. So we have to thank them for having such great photos available to us. So this was the garden that was outside the Fowler, and this is a great representation of Gothic high style revival that was used. And this kind of style was can be seen in a design book that was massively produced and used. So owners could go to their local carpenter and be like, I want this style design. And then they could replicate it and place it on their home. So we can kind of see this style through, and quickly before I get into the design books, is that here's the front facade right here. And the Fowler home, I also had skipped over, it was built in 1852 for those that you don't know. And this far left side was an addition, and I believe it was the 1940s, I was told, that it was added on for more kitchen and commercial usage right there as well. And you can't really see it in this photo, but there was a small sleeping porch up above on that porch right there as well. But again, some great eave designs and the arched windows, arc windows right there, and the overall high style Gothic design as well. And so I want you guys to also think about what was going on in 1852 at that time. You guys? Yeah. Prior to the Civil War, but I mean, still tensions were running high. Kind of, I guess I'm going to think of more economic wise. Maybe, I mean, that kind of vary into different demographics, but it was more so that during the Industrial Revolution, this is kind of when things were pushing through. So people started turning away from that and very industrialized, hard way of life and started referring back to the classics and to the classic books and looking back at countryside of England and started turning away from that hard life because, I mean, the windowless rooms of factories and such. So people started turning away and looking for more of a romantic escape. And that's how Gothic revival kind of turns into it. Also, when you look at Gothic revival style homes, it's really kind of pulling from obviously England, but also Germanic roots. At this time, it kind of falls into the Victorian range. And obviously Queen Victoria at the time was a German ruler. And so that's where you can kind of see those like ties to there as well. All right, so here is the Ramey Milligan house. This isn't located in Crawfordsville, but you can kind of see those same features of the eaves this like the curved eaves and along with those arch windows as well. Oh my gosh. And so you can kind of, and like these have more of very ornate finials. And this house right here is their porch is that was from a Queen Anne style addition as well. But then this also kind of can tell you about at that time that addition of that porch that they wanted really kind of honed into them wanting to greet guests from this side of the home, which I will go into the next slide. Oops, and here's more of the design
Is it still
features.
standing?
It is, yeah. The porch is not currently on the home, but this home is still standing in Crawfordsville. It's on the west side. But this is a photo from 1962, and then here is more of the design books as well. So you see this kind of sloping eaves right here, and the drip molds right there as well. And this, obviously, if we go back to the Fowler mansion, you can see those the same windows as well. And so they kind of play on it. Obviously, the Fowlers had a little bit more money, so they were going a little bit more intricate with their design. The Ramey Milligan house has a little bit more of a simplified version of that. Again, what I was pointing out too is that this would be where room 2 and 5 is. This is really interesting is that you kind of see the stairway right there. When I was showing you guys the task photo with that porch, that was on the side with 6 and 7. That is on the east side. So which is really fascinating is that in a lot of floor plans with Gothic Revival homes is that the stairway is meant to greet people right when you enter in to show wealth. That is not in the case in this house. So it's still a mystery, but we can kind of assume is that the north side was more for family use and proper use. And the east side was for greeting people that were coming up the lawn for more on walking. But it's still fascinating to see how they were being used at different points in time. And very fascinating nonetheless. So even looking into the floor plans of the home gives us information on what the building was used for, how it was being used, and the functions for them as well. Another one with this kind of same situation with the different entryways is the Elston home in Crawfordsville as well. This is really fascinating is because obviously you would think that in this colonial revival home, you would say this is the front door, original front door. Not the case, even though it is facing Lane Place now in the main road, it actually is on the side because that side faced the railroad tracks because obviously railroad transportation was way more common than the street. So that is what they chose for the front door. Isn't that fascinating? A lot of times you can see this down in Charleston in a lot of the homes is that they face the river because obviously boat was easier to travel than road going through the marshes. So you see that as well. And as automobile and walking have become more common in our society, it turns towards the road. And so we can kind of see that shift in usage and need to the homes as well. So it still, again, tells the story of what the building has been used for and society's needs transferring through the decades.
You know who lives in that house now?
I met her and her dog a couple of months ago. It is slipping my mind. She has a sweet dog. I believe that she is an alumni.
She's the
President of Wabash College. She's the president now. Okay, that's exciting. But yeah, I know I only pay attention to the dog, I guess, right? But very sweet woman. She was so nice to let me pet her dog when we were heading on into the city council meeting. But great home. Would highly suggest you guys walking by. But again, this home shows how kind of things transfer over through the years as well. And so it's just people transferring what they deem necessities through the years. Another one is buildings can be moved to continue telling their story. Again, so this is obviously, you guys know, is your historic train depot of Lafayette. And it was moved to still accommodate to the railway station and other transportations as well. So this was a great way to keep telling its story and still be invested in the community as well. Making sure I'm on time. All right. And so here is the South Square of Lafayette's courtyard. And I wanted to, this is about 1910. And I do kind of want you guys to view this building and really take in these different types of buildings that are here. And when you guys go out again, I believe that the next ones will have the next ones that I'm pointing out. But these ones show the different styles. And I believe that the end building right here is still available, as well as the next 4 or 5 in. I do know that the one on the corner is not, but this was taken about 1910. You guys can kind of see that they're still standing. The roads are obviously now paved, so we're kind of seeing that shift again. Yes. So the next photos right here, if you're paying attention to that main building, you can still see it. And obviously the bank building on the corner is gone and it has been transferred with a smaller one, but all the buildings next to it are still standing, showing that they are still preserved and still standing and serving their community. And if we go into, I was going to kind of point out this kind of ghostwriting, and usually I was hoping that this would show up a little bit better than it did on this presentation. But usually you can kind of see where it does have a advertisement for, we go into the Sanborn maps, which you can find on the Library of Congress website. You can see the Loeb and Hine Co. department store. And so that is what the ghostwriting tells us, is that this building used to be a department store and still is for commercial use. And can I also have you guys kind of look back between, I'm gonna leave you guys a second to kind of look at what's here right now. And besides the bank building being changed, what has been different from this photo?
Trees.
Yes, trees, paved roads, you're right. I'm gonna be looking more closely to the buildings themselves. Oh yeah, you're right. They get taken off, but specifically with that building, you're right. Which is really interesting. I'll just go into it because it's kind of a fine detail, is that this building is referenced as 2 separate, while if you kind of look at it, it's still referenced as 1. So it's been combined as to be 1 single building rather than 2 separate.
One of them used to be a shoe store.
Really?
To the east of Lowe's, there was a skinny little shoe store.
There were 2 shoe stores.
Were there?
Others something else.
So
So
it's-
one of them office now.
So it was probably like in recent years that it kind of changed over. And also I just find this really interesting that this building has made an L right there. So it has 2 different access points. Another one is the Long Mars Theater that was originally from the Luna Playhouse. But this great neoclassical design right there. I know that we are kind of thanks for time and I do want to answer more questions. So I will kind of just quickly go over this, but another great building for what is still standing and how it's been preserved in this great neoclassical design. Another great one, this is over in the Pierce neighborhood. This is a great colonial revival. This was kind of probably built around the 19-teens era. Does anyone kind of know what was happening? Sorry, not 19-teens, 1925. Does anyone kind of know why this specific style, a colonial revival style, had come up at that point in time? Has to do with, yes.
The 150th anniversary
Yes, you are right, Claire. Yes. So the colonial revival is coming back to celebrate America and its roots and kind of turning back to the colonial time frame. So again, people's style really does reflect their social mindset and their times, and it was really kind of turning back. In a lot of architecture classes, you'll kind of hear about the bell curve. After every so often, it comes back around. So usually they would have said 28 years. We're now seeing it at a faster pace because of social media. But every 28 years, you see a resurgence in the same style come back. If you guys can kind of see it, a lot of the 80s is coming back right now. For a lot of my parents' hatred, they're still seeing the styles that haunted them when they were younger. And so another great point is that around this house right here is this beautiful prairie style, maybe a little bit more Art Deco fence. And this also tells us information about where this building is located. It's because it is in the Pierce estate, which is attached to this prairie style home just on the side. I apologize also for my photos because due to the fires up in Canada, it was a little hazy that day. So here's the Pierce mansion that is just over there, which has been that whole estate where the last colonial revival that was on used to belong to the mansion. Obviously it was portioned out. I believe that the colonial revival's family was descendants of Pierce. I think it was his daughter, and then he built her a home for her family as well. Yes, it is over at the colonial revival home is 605 Lingle Avenue. Yeah. Pardon? Yes, yes. And so that's also a great detail is that this fence right here tells the history and story of the surrounding homes. And it goes around a lot of the other ones as well, but I just wanted to point that out as well. Here's a great Queen Anne, and Queen Anne's are really known for their colorful paint. This one was just redone. It was in green, but now it's in this great warm hue color as well. So I wanted to kind of point that out. You can kind of see the great porch design as well. Queen Anne kind of derives off of its the Gothic Revival. Gothic Revival would be a little bit more of a moodier sister to it. But kind of phasing after around the 1880s, it's kind of turning in. And again, I would refer to architectural styles as a pendulum. They do overlap a lot of the time, but they're not always distinct in one character feature as well. But so you kind of see it started swifting from a moodier Gothic Revival to a more colorful style, but still very ornate style. Here is an Italianate, and I wanted to point this out because it's still a great simple version, but this is a simplified version of, and you can kind of see through the bays windows, the elongated windows, the eaves on the top as well, but they also reflect to this house as well. This is a little bit more of an ornate Italianate, but you can still see it between the windows and the overall decorative elements as well. And so I'll go back one more time, see it in the windows and the square decorative elements. Italianates really, again, from what they derived from, go to driving from Italians, mainly Florence, just to kind of give off this impeding kind of more a masculine design of architecture. It's supposed to be kind of very foreboding and prevalent rather than the Queen Anne that's a little bit more delicate features and design. They want to make a stance, and that's kind of what this style is giving. If you look to Florence, the Medici towers are something that they reference a lot as well. Here's another one that you see very commonly throughout Lafayette. It's just the French, oh my gosh, Second Empire. It's one of my favorite styles. You see the mansard, pardon?
They say it's a little blue.
It's a little blue. I would specify that the style is my favorite. The mansard roof and the tower itself. A lot of times people refer to this kind of style the Second Empire as a spooky home because a lot of times Disney has portrayed it as a haunted style home, but I refer to it as more of a festive home. Yes.
I've heard this referred to as steamboat Gothic.
Yes. Yes.
That's still correct.
Not, I mean, I called it Second Empire, because it would kind of fall between in the 1880s, and it's the resurgence of a more French style. And so that's kind of where it's kind of pulling from as well. But you can also see it more in the Riddle Loma's house, and this is in Battleground. You can kind of see the more Gothic features of the side house, but still it's Second Empire because you see that tower with the mansard roof right there. But Steamboat Classic, that kind of pulls from, again, more of its social presence in a lot of movies and how it's portrayed through to the public as well. I think that's kind of where that steamboat style verbiage. Yes, exactly. So kind of how people interpret it back and forth. But Second Empire usually just refers to kind of it's like French and Gothic kind of style roots. But again, like your references refer more to how it's perceived socially, which obviously sometimes just prevails a little bit harder than its official name. Yeah, exactly, right. No, these are my favorite for that reason. I find them really great homes, stylistic wise. This is one of my second favorite style designs, and I'm not gonna say a lot of people enjoy it, feel the same way, but this is brutalist architecture. This has come more during the 70s and 80s. Can anyone tell me why this is more of a style that has come out? So
Cheap materials.
that too. Exactly, common materials. Also during this time, it was the energy crisis, so smaller windows were needed. Concrete was coming, but also, if you notice, it's brutalist architecture usually falls in with federal buildings. And does anyone kind of know why, besides the material costs and such? That the word applies because they want to feel, when you're going up to build, just like kind of like art, they want you to feel something. And when you're going up to brutalist architecture, you feel small, right? You feel very singled out, and it's very small, dark, and they usually kind of funnel you in the interior. That is what brutalist architecture is supposed to invoke, that feeling. And that's why I think it's such an interesting form of architecture, is because it's invoking a sense of feeling. A lot of times now you can see them coming out with green roofs and more colorful art, just as you can kind of see in this photo, in the closer to the main structure of the building. There's a lot of colorful paint going on in there to kind of liven it up a little bit. But it's still interesting to show how different architecture has changed throughout the century, and how they're still trying to make a sense of feeling come from this type of architecture that you see. So again, Victorian and Gothic architecture invokes a sense of romanticism and feeling of the cottage lifestyle and countryside lifestyle, while we have the brutalist architecture that wants to make you feel small, and so you feel that overboding sense of government authority. And so that is what architecture can do. Another one is to still portray its heritage roots. These are the Luna apartments that are coming up in downtown. Does anyone know why they're named Luna Apartments? Luna Theater, you're right there. So it's still kind of honing back into its history right there. And I think that's still a very nice way to go back to its original roots and what it has been replacing. And so again, that name of that building is telling a story about what it has replaced. And again, stories buildings tell. It just has to be told in an effective way. And this is another one. This is from Frankfurt, but I love to mention it just because it's a great photo that you usually don't see too often, is that it's a photo of all the bricklayers of the streets in Frankfurt. And so I think it tells a story about who was creating these homes and the craftsmanship and the trades people that have been building these buildings throughout. And I think that's a really great photo. So I hope this kind of gives, yeah, I hope that these presentation has given you more information and really has invoked a lot of thought into what stories buildings tell and how can you seek them and find them. And just to give you a little bit more food for thought. But thank you guys so much for attending. I appreciate it. Any questions that I can answer?
Is there, and perhaps it was covered in the previous presentation, but is there a particular place where someone could go? That's not me, but someone could go if they had purchased a home that had apparently quite a bit of history and wanted some guidance as to doing things in keeping with the home.
Yeah, so there is, well, I mean, obviously Indiana Landmarks is always happy to come up and help and do a site visit and talk in a little bit more. But if you were to type in the Secretary of Interior Standards, the National Park Service has created a, I would say guidebook standards, obviously it's standards, but a guide how to preserve historic buildings and how to go about restoration, rehab, and other works to preserve the building itself. So that's a really great resource tool because it really instructs you. Obviously, preservation is not just, just preservationists and historians. It has librarians, it has engineers, it has architectures, it has archaeologists all coming together to put their fair share of sense in to create this standards book. So I really like to say that it's not, a law abiding, it's always everlasting changing. And we're always trying to find new ways to innovate it. And that's what the Secretary of Standards do. So that's what we go off of. When I go in, I will kind of go off the Secretary of Interior Standards, but obviously Indiana Landmarks, and then a local preservation group like Wabash Valley Trust and Lafayette. Preserve Lafayette is not a physical entity, but Sean Lutz is in both of them and he's very knowledgeable in historic preservation. So he obviously would be a great resource. Your library, and then obviously the Historical Association is also a great resource as well. So many, yeah.
Want to show us your paint chips?
No, not right now.
And I also want to let you guys know that we do have some more magazines up here, some more resources, and more about our Black Heritage Preservation Program that we just launched this past year, and to start researching more about Black heritage and the history around Indiana. Would really encourage you guys to all look into that. We're also having a Juneteenth celebration at our central office on the 20th. So I would encourage you guys to all come out for some music and celebrations. Tickets are available online at our website as well. Pardon? At our central office in Indianapolis. Yes.
Any other questions? All right, thank
All
you.
right. No, thank you. Appreciate it, guys.